Ever since 1969, Scooby Doo and his friends have been solving mysteries of all different shapes and sizes, from vampires to aliens to even, of course, people in masks. But there is one mystery that has left to be answered, and its answer can completely shift how we see Scooby Doo and his entire world. And no, it's not how Velma got Season 2, although that is a pretty big one as well. Hello, everyone. It's your favorite West Virginia now in space here, and I'm a big fan of Scooby-Doo. I've been watching since I was a little kid. My first ever real experience with Scooby-Doo was Zombie Island, so naturally, I got off to the great start with that. The only downside being is that pretty much everything else is downhill from there, but hey, what are you gonna do? Overall, though, I'm a big fan of Scooby-Doo, and I just love it, and, you know, it's not always great, but hey, you know, it's almost always enjoyable, but almost always. But there's only been one question that bugged me, even from a little age. See, even as a little kid, in Zombie Island, they mention how the gang is older, but they never look it. And granted, most people chalk this to cartoon logic, but I don't think it's that simple. I think there's actually a very deep mystery going on here that its answers are, of course, very fascinating. I think can completely shift how we view the series and lead to some very interesting thoughts on how the world of Scooby-Doo works. Of course, why don't the gang age? Are they immortal? How is that working out for them? And of course, what are the consequences of this fact in the universe? Anyway, I think it'll be interesting to discuss. I don't think no one else is really talking about this, and I'm going to hopefully shed a light on this confusing situation, let's just say. Let's begin. First question we of course have to ask is there actually a inconsistency with their age? AKA, is there a timeline that has stretched on long enough that this gang should have aged? Now, this is where the immediately first issue comes in, as not all Scooby-Doo media clearly takes place in the same universe. Obviously, some are separated from each other, and within their own little timelines, their ages are much more consistent. For instance, the Mystery Gang, a Mystery Incorporated version of the team, is of course pretty consistent with itself, and there's a few others that are like this. So we need to find a timeline where it's gone on long enough that they should have visibly aged to lead to the inconsistency I'm talking about. At first, this seems rather difficult because all the series feel relatively self-contained / always connecting with each other in a way that makes it hard to get a clear timeline. However, I've put together a little map here that helps show it. As a note going forward, I am, however, going to assume that all Scooby-Doo media, unless otherwise mentioned, takes place roughly in the year it was produced. This is because most Scooby-Doo media tends to just assume it takes place in the modern day, aka whenever the show was made, and because sometimes it becomes the tech of the time becomes relevant in an episode that wouldn't make sense if it wasn't taking place in that time. So I'm going to assume that any piece of Scooby-Doo media does take place in the year more or less when it was produced. Okay, we're good. Timeline 1 is the timeline I'm going to concern myself with here, because, as you'll soon see, it's the one with the actual discrepancy in the characters' ages that is very visibly notable. Now, the linchpin of this entire timeline is Zombie Island, which is a great movie, you should see it, and it takes place in 1998. This is relevant. Now, on the movie, it's obviously set up that time has passed for the gang. This gang has been doing this for at least some amount of time, and then broke up for a while as well. This is notable as, given certain things both in this movie and in other movies clearly connected to it, say Cyber Chase, it is very clear that it is set up as a sequel to the original series of Scooby-Doo, which started in 1969. Already, that's a massive jump in age between when the original series took place and when Zombie Island took place. However, it could be argued that character is cartoon looking, and it's not entirely, there is some wiggle room that maybe only some version of the events of the original series took place before Zombie Island, and so the ages could be more consistent. I don't believe that. It's very clearly set up as a continuation of the original, but you could try to argue that. What becomes a lot less arguable is Zombie Island 2, Return to Zombie Island, which, granted, from what I've seen, is not a very good movie, and no one seems to like it, but when I talk about the quality of Scooby-Doo writing, we're talking about the timeline. What's notable about that is that it is a direct sequel to Zombie Island, aka the two movies are sequels to each other, meaning that all three of these pieces of media, the original Scooby-Doo series, Zombie Island, and Return to Zombie Island, as well as some associated media here and there, is all part of one timeline, give or take some. Now, what exactly takes place in all this timeline is up for debate, but the really notable part is, getting back to this, Return to Zombie Island takes place, given when it was made, in 2019. Meaning that the Scooby-Doo gang in this timeline A is presented here, has been active since 1969. The gap of time between the original series and Return to Zombie Island 2, if we assume it is the latest piece of media in this timeline, is 50 years. The gang has been solving mysteries for 50 years. That is an actual inconsistency. No matter how you slice or try to play around with the numbers, you don't get a world where that makes sense. The gang should visibly look older by a lot. They are at best late teens or mid-teens or something like that in the original series. They should be in their 60s or 70s at least. So the question, of course, is, why don't they look different? Now, this is why I stumbled for a long time, because nothing made sense. I based on what my mother said, I thought, oh, maybe they were ghosts, but that didn't pan out. I thought robots, because robotics are pretty advanced. That didn't pan out. I even thought magic, because certain magically associated characters don't seem to age, but those all took place in different timelines, so that can't work. In fact, I was really stumped on this. I couldn't find an answer to this. I really thought maybe I didn't have anything. Maybe there was nothing that could connect in a way that made sense, and it was just silly cartoon writing and nothing interesting going on here. There was nothing to make a fun theory about. And that's why I left it for a long time. Until I happened to see one thing that stood out like a sore thumb. One time where we do see characters not age for a long period of time, and we know the source of it. We know how it works. And what's that, you may ask? That's right, Zombie Island here again for the save, because it is the one clear instance we know of characters not aging for long periods of time, and we know how it does. The cat god and the cat were people obviously are not aging. Well, granted, there is some complexity to that I do want to explain, is that we do know that the cat people do need to drain the life of others in order to, not die, as we see in the movie. Now, this gets interesting as how the power is framed, specifically that they were given power by the cat god. Now, this becomes, of course, interesting as the weakness, the fact that they need to drain life, is considered a curse. That is not considered a natural consequence of the ability, but the cat god actively did this. Now, what this means, a few things, is that A, there is a god in the Scooby Doo world, we'll get back to that, but also is that the cat god has the power to apparently manipulate ages and just chooses not to. He purposely put that curse in place on them for whatever reason he chose appropriate. And even though the cat god has only seemingly made an appearance in that one movie, we can reasonably speculate that this power is something he can grant relatively freely. After all, it was able to do it for 2 random villagers and maybe the boatman. It's kind of hard to tell. Either way, though, we have a clear indicator. We know of an entity that can grant immortality, or once again, at least eternal youth, to people of its choosing. So that sounds like a pretty clear reason to kind of, not an answer, but it does explain some things. We see characters that don't age, and we know there's entities in the Scooby Doo world that can grant immortality. Notice I said entities, though. This gets back to the cat god itself, as we have precious details on what the cat god truly is. This is actually a bit interesting, as the statue doesn't really give a whole lot, as a lot of people have linked it to Bastet from Egyptian mythology, but the problem with that theory is that, well, it's a dude. Bastet is pretty much always depicted as a girl, so that doesn't seem to track well. And though I'm no super big expert on mythology, I know enough I can't really think of any immediately male-associated cat god, and doing some basic research on Wikipedia does not give anything that looks like the appearance. So I'm going to assume that in the Scooby Doo world, the cat god is its own individual thing. It's not based on something from an actual mythology, more or less. If I'm wrong or you think you have an answer, I'd love to hear it down below. But this is interesting, is it's called the cat god. Now, this may sound like a weird detail. I mean, obviously, it turns people into cat monsters, it has associated with cats, that feels like it's pretty logical. But if the cat god was the only god in the Scooby Doo world, why would it be called specifically the cat god? You don't see people who follow an Abrahamic religion call God the dog god, even though he would technically somewhat qualify, or an earth god. You never see that, because the portfolio of what it deals with is so much bigger. You just don't limit it. The only time you really see people ever limit down a god to just one aspect like that is if it's part of a pantheon and has a much more specialized role, which is, like, once again, why some, like, an entity like, say, Bastet is called the cat goddess, because that's one of her principal things, which leads to a very big implication. The cat god isn't alone. There are other gods in the Scooby Doo world, all capable of presumably granting this power, as we don't have much intel on their natures. This is why I do want to say something is, you could make a link to, like, the Anunnaki from Mystery Incorporated, or the Cerberus and such from that one Scooby movie. However, those two both take place in different timelines, so though they do set a precedent that godlike entities can exist in the Scooby Doo universes, it doesn't work for this timeline because they don't exist here. But I think the implications of what having a pantheon of gods in the Scooby Doo world is can actually explain why the group doesn't age, as I think it's, at least here's my theory on that, if you will humor me for a second. The theory I give you all today, the Hidden Divinity Theory, postulates that because we can logically assume that the cat god is not the only god entity in the Scooby-Doo universe, and because that implies there must be quite a few of them, and they don't seem to be public knowledge in a lot of cases, that heavily implies that they are staying hidden for some reason. That, for whether because of some other even higher power keeping them in check, or they have self-imposed rules, they do not want the public to know about their existence despite their great powers, at least not on any mass scale beyond, say, small cults or personal a few individuals, for whatever reasons. However, this does become a bit of an interesting thing is, well, why would they grant eternal youth to Scooby-Doo and his gang? That seems like a massive risk to their security. However, I think it comes down to a bit of the Scooby-Doo world itself. A consistent aspect in which every Scooby-Doo world and Timeline 1, as we're showing here, is that people are very superstitious, or more accurately, they will very quickly believe anything. Someone dresses up as a ghost, they'll instantly believe it. Someone dresses up as a ghoul, or a zombie, or whatever, no matter how ridiculous or absurd, or how based upon whatever it was before, people pretty much instantly believe it. There are very few skeptics in the Scooby-Doo world. If you were some supernatural entities trying to hide, this is very bad. As I previously mentioned in some other videos hinting to that, is this similar idea, is that in the modern world, if you saw an actual supernatural creature, there's a very good chance you would try to rationalize it away, try to say you saw something or believe it, or if you saw a video of something supernatural, you'd probably believe it's a trailer for a movie or something. This does not happen logically in the Scooby-Doo world. People jump way too quickly to something being a real monster. If you were, like I said, a supernatural entity trying to hide, or a godlike entity, this is terrifying because people are always operating at high alert. They are always instinctively trying to reach for the metaphorical gun on that. So, you would want, preferably, some people to be disproving the supernatural as much as possible. In comes Scooby-Doo, who spend their entire careers pretty much debunking the supernatural. They go around solving crimes such and proving to people that these monsters aren't real. That's the message they send. And if you were these entities, this is great. They're going around and basically slowly but surely making people think less and less that the supernatural can be real. So, perhaps making them effectively not die is an effective means to do it. It's a small, blatant supernatural thing, but it helps to prevent the rise of suspicion in the Scooby-Doo world towards them, effectively getting the heat off them. That, for whatever reason, helps keep them hidden, so keeping the gang around is beneficial. Now, as to why the Scooby-Doo gang doesn't seem to realize this, I suspect they do, in this theory, actually understand this. I think they, at least some of them, more intelligent ones like Velma or Fred, probably do understand that they're being played by higher powers. But think about Zombie Island, when they learned of the cat god's existence. They saw that these guys can curse you. They can lead to your demise. So maybe don't bite the hand that feeds you, so to speak. Just keep quiet about it and don't think about it much. In fact, if anything, that could explain why in some later series the gang seems to be way more actively trying to debunk the supernatural instead of just solving crimes. This could be an active effort to try to make sure they stay on the side of whatever entity is powering them up to keep them young and healthy. This could also explain maybe some other feats of power they have, but I don't tend to believe this is the case. So overall, that's my theory, the Hidden Divinity Theory, as to why the Scooby-Doo gang doesn't age. Long story short, there are godlike entities effectively keeping them young in order to keep their existence hidden because they solve mysteries. Now, do I think this is actually what the writers are thinking? No, I don't think the writers have ever actually thought this theory out or ever actually considered it. I just think it's a fun explanation for why the gang doesn't age in the show, and I think it's just fun and interesting. Definitely more interesting than Velma. And overall, would I like to see this be canon? Kinda, it would be fun. I think you could do a lot with it. Ultimately, though, once again, it's just a theory. I don't think it's necessarily true, but I think it's a good explanation. But I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. Please comment down below. Do you have an explanation for why the gang doesn't age? Do you think it's just not anything to worry about? Or do you think the theory would actually be a cool way to do a more serious Scooby-Doo show again? Either way, I'd love to hear your likes and thoughts and comments and all that jazz. If you dislike, dislike and all that jazz. And I'll see you all next time. Yeah. Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscribble. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.